Welcome to the Nerdstalgic podcast with your host, the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm.
Howdy Beans, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Nerdstalgic podcast with your host, me, Luke the Human. Hope you're doing well, hope you're all good, as per usual. I'm really excited about this episode, I really am. This is a movie that I've never seen before, I've always wanted to watch, and it was kind of like Emily. It was one of those movies that I always ever got close to getting a chance to watch it, but as soon as I got close to watching it, like the rug got pulled under me. I wasn't there that day at school, or I missed it in media, or I just never got around to it. It was on TV, but I was busy. Pan's Labyrinth is that same sort of situation. It's a movie that I've wanted to watch for years, and I've never got the chance. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at Pan's Labyrinth. But before I get into all that, make sure that you follow me at Twitter at Nerdstalgic_pod to keep up to date on everything and anything that I'm doing. You can also subscribe to me on YouTube at the Nerdstalgic Podcast. Currently, as I'm recording this, I am at 89 subscribers, which is monumental. So I'm almost one away from my goal at 90 subs. So if you're listening, you haven't subbed yet, and I'm still at 89, which is a possibility, please do subscribe, like, comment, and all that jazz. Share it with your friends. Help me out so much. But yeah, so as I mentioned, we're going to be looking at the legendary movie Pan's Labyrinth by the equally legendary Guillermo del Toro. Like I said, I've never watched this movie before, so I have nothing to say. And it kind of benefits this new way that I do reviews, because anybody who doesn't know, anybody who's new, the way I tend to do reviews nowadays, if it be video games, movies, TV shows, whatever it is, I tend to pre-record the review, the introduction first. So that way I can't sort of let my views out early. Because what I used to do a review in full after I've watched the film, played the game, that sort of thing. And I would kind of jump to it. I'd be like, oh, I like this bit, I like that bit, and I would spoil it, and it wouldn't give it any fun for anybody to sort of keep listening. So I figured it'd be fun in a way that I don't watch the movie or play the game. That way, my introduction is pure, it's clean, it's not muddled by my thoughts and feelings of what is I've seen. And that works perfectly for that, because again, I know nothing about this film. I only know certain snippets that I've seen here and there, that there's a thorn in it, that there is a guy who has eyes on his hands. That's about it. But those are the images that nearly everybody knows, because that's whenever this movie's advertised anywhere, those are the images that you always see. So like I said, I've never mentioned it. Really excited. And it wasn't till really after I reviewed Pinocchio, the live action movie, that it kind of sat with me, and I thought, you know what, I've got to, I can't call myself a Del Toro fan if I haven't watched Pan's Labyrinth. It's his magnum opus, or as people tell me, it's his best work, and I haven't seen it. It's not an English movie. This is a Spanish film. It's English subtitles, but again, one of my favorite movies is Amélie, and that's a French film with English subtitles, so that doesn't bother me. So I don't know what to expect for this film. I really don't. All I know, it's a fantasy world, and that's it, by Del Toro. And I know that he is a visionary, that he has a great mind. He's got a beautiful cinematography. He loves practical effects. I love practical effects. I think they're better than CGI any day, mainly because practical effects will last time, especially if it's done well, will stand the test of time, where CGI, it might look good today, but 10, 20 years in the future could look primitive and really bad, so I'm excited. I really am. So I can't wait to get into it, but before I am going to get into the review, before I'm going to go off and watch the movie and then come back and review it for you Beans, I want to look into sort of the production of it. I haven't looked too deep, mainly because I'm trying to save myself some spoilers, but I'm going to give sort of a brief idea of sort of a brief plot, a brief summary of this film. For anybody who hasn't watched, anybody who's not a fan, who's like me, going in new, this is for us. This is just a brief summary of what this film is. So Pan's Labyrinth is a 2006 fantasy horror film, written, directed, and co-produced by Guillermo del Toro. The story takes place in Spain during the summer of 1944, 5 years after the Spanish Civil War. During the early Francoist period, the narrative intertwines this real world with a mystical world centered on an overgrown, abandoned labyrinth and a mysterious fawn creature, with whom the main character, Ophelia, interacts with. I haven't gone any deeper than that. There was more, but that's as deep as I've gone, and I think that is enough to kind of set the scene. That it's during the Second World War, or close to the end of the Second World War, in Spain after the Civil War. You know, this really sort of sets the period, sets the time frame in 1944 in an abandoned labyrinth. Go forth, So as that's got me more intrigued. I want to know more. I want to know why there's a magical creature inside this abandoned labyrinth and how the labyrinth intertwines, as it mentions, with the real world and the fantasy world. And how does she get there? Is it like a Alice in Wonderland situation where she gets lost and she finds herself in a magical kingdom? Or is it like Narnia, teleporting, portals, that sort of thing? That again, it's got my interest. And I generally thought this movie was older than 2006. I thought it was this was like 90s, early 2000s. So to hear it's 2006, it really does surprise me. Also, it's a fantasy horror. I love fantasy. I love horror. So bleed them together. I'm already on board. As for the production, I won't go deep into this, but there is a lot to it. But in my notes and what I wrote down in my impressions, the idea for Pan's Labyrinth came from Guillermo del Toro's notebooks, which he says are filled with doodles, ideas, drawings, and plot bits. He had been keeping those notebooks for 20 years. At one point during production, he left the notebook in a taxi in London and was distraught, but the cabbie returned it to him 2 days later. Though he originally wrote a story about a pregnant woman who falls in love with a fawn, Sergi Lopez said that Del Toro described the final version of the plot a year and a half before filming. Lopez said that for 2 hours and a half, he explained to me all the movie, but with all the details. It was incredible. And when he finished, I said, "You have a script." He said, "No, nothing is written." Lopez agreed to act in the movie and received the script 1 year later. He said that it was exactly the same. It was incredible. In his little head, he had all the history with a lot of detail, a lot of character. Like now, when you look at the movie, it was exactly what he had in his head. Del Toro got the idea of the thorn from a childhood experience with lucid dreaming. He started on the Charlie Road. He stated on the Charlie Road. So I can't even read my own writing. That every midnight he would wake up and a fawn would gradually step out from behind the grandfather's clock. Originally, the fawn was supposed to be a classic half-human, half-goat fawn, fraught with beauty. But in the end, the fawn was altered into a goat-faced creature, almost completely made out of earth, moss, vines, and tree bark. He became a mysterious, semi-suspicious relic who gave both the impression of trustworthiness and many signs that warned someone to never confide in him at all. There's a lot more to do with the production. This what kind of inspired me really when you look at the effects part of it. Pan's Labyrinth employs some computer-generated imagery in its effects, but it mostly uses complex makeup and animatronics. The giant toad was inspired by the maze. Del Toro himself performed the noises. The mandrake route is a combination of animatronics and CGI. Del Toro wanted the fairies to look like little monkeys, little dirty fairies, but the animation company had the idea to give them wings made of leaves. Jones, who is the guy that plays the Thorn, I think if I remember correctly, Jones is. Hold on, let me go back. It's Doug Jones, who plays the Mel Thorn, who played Billy in Hocus Pocus. To be honest, he's been in all. I think he did the voice for Jack Skellington, I believe. I think he also did. He played the water monster in Shape of Water. I think he's been in most of Del Toro's movies, to be honest. He just has that. Again, I'm sure he's a decent bloke, but he just has that ghoulish look to him. He has that kind of body where he can very morph into these very sort of skeleton-y creatures. Like I think he always played. He was in Hellboy. He was the Fishman. Yeah, I'm sure he played him as well. Jones spent an average of 5 hours sitting in the makeup chair as his team of David Matari and Musti Ribi and Xavier Batista applied the makeup for the fawn, which was mostly latex foam. The last piece to be applied was the pair of horns, which weighed 10 pounds and were extremely tiring to wear. The legs were a unique design, with Joe standing on a 20-centimeter high lifts, which was 8 inches for those of you that live in America, and the legs of the Thorn attached to his own. His lower leg was eventually digitally erased in post-production. The Thorn's flapping ears and blinking eyes were remotely operated by David Matari and Xavier Batista from DTT Effectos Espiralitis while on set. Del Toro told Jones to go rock star like a glam rocker, but less David Bowie and more Mick Jagger. So that's it for the production. I didn't really want to go too deep, obviously. I didn't want to go too far into it because I didn't want to spoil it for myself. And I knew that if I was going to sort of recount some of the production notes and things like that, I didn't want to spoil it for anybody else who equally hasn't watched it. So for those of you who are fans of this movie, who are coming into this, that's why I'm keeping it quite a bare, because I want to go in fresh. I would imagine because there's it's fantasy, there are going to be fairies and thorns and that sort of thing in it, so it's not so spoiled to me. And yeah, I'm ready for this adventure. So I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm just going to go into it. So I'm going to go off and watch the movie now. When I come back, I've watched the movie in full, notes and all, and yeah, so I can't wait. Let's go into the labyrinth, shall we? Right, so I've just finished watching Pan's Labyrinth, and honestly, I'm in awe. Like this movie is and was powerful. It's gorgeous. It's emotive. It's wonderful. It's dark. It's brutal. It's statistic at not statistic, sadistic at times. In terms of characters and their motives and what they do. Um, it's also wonderful. It's beautiful, and I've said gorgeous before already, but it is just a powerhouse of art. You know, this is what art is in terms of movies and storytelling, you know. And that's what it felt like to me. It didn't feel like a movie. It felt like I was watching art in motion, and it's it's weird because everything and anything is art. A book is art, a painting, as well as art. A movie, a video game, anything can be considered art just by looking out your window is art of nature, of life. But when you ever watch a movie, you just know when you watch it that it's a work of art that you're watching, and I could tell that straight away by the colors, but the way people were dressed, the way the setting and the camera work and everything was just done in such a way where I could feel like I'm watching art. And this was right at the beginning of the movie. And as the movie went on, every shot was just like gorgeous, beautiful. And when it needed to be dark, it was. And it needed to be bright, it was. When it needed to be fanciful and creepy and unsettling, it was. Everything about it was just art. And that's Del Toro. Every movie I've ever watched of his is just art. Even Hellboy, that's like an action sort of movie, but if you really break down the Hellboy character, especially from the comics and sort of Del Toro's spin on it, it is a very dark fairy tale sort of fantasy. You deal with the underworld, you deal with fauns and all different types of creatures, different sort of folksy ideas and concepts and magic and just wondrous things and worlds and environments, which I can understand why Del Toro was attracted to doing Hellboy in the first place, because this movie is just beautiful. That's my going in thoughts. That's my initial thoughts to start with. But the movie is brutal. It is brutal. In its settings, its themes, its characters. This is a fairy tale for adults. As I said in the introduction, the setting is 1944, during the Spanish Civil War. So the whole sort of setting of this movie, it's set in like a farm in a clearing, and you're surrounded by the trees, and then you've got the sort of captain, the general, he's there, and then you have Ophelia and her mother. Her mother is pregnant, but she's not very well. She's not having a very good pregnancy, and you have soldiers all around. It's kind of, if So it felt a bit more like the boy in the striped pajamas. If you ever watched that movie, how the little boy when he goes there with his father and he's surrounded by these soldiers and he's still sort of he doesn't know about what the world's like. He just knows that there's something bad going on in the world, but he feels like he's on the side of the right side, you know. And eventually, as the story goes on, he realizes that the side he's on isn't the good side at all. Um, and that's the same for Ophelia and her mother. Is the fact of her mother understands what's going on in the world. She's an adult. She knows it. She's drawn into a situation where the captain has took favour of her Ophelia's mother. So in a way to kind of be like, he doesn't say it, but like my interpretation is, come live with me, come be with me. You're pregnant. A child's a father should be there when the child is born. Wherever the child is, that's where the father should. Wherever the father is, that's where the child should be. If that's the line anyway from the film. I did write it down, but I feel like I've misplaced it. So you already have this setting of war, of strife, of political unrest. With the rebels and with the soldiers. And Ophelia, she is still a child. She still sees the world as fairy tale. She reads fairy tale books. Even the books she reads when you first meet her, she's reading books about fairies and mystical creatures. She's still very much, a child. She hasn't had to grow up quickly. She's still pure, innocent, very much the fact of, and I'll get into this in a minute, but her perspective on the world is very different to how adults see the world, as it would be anyway, normally. She hasn't had to grow up quickly yet. She's still very much a child, and that is lent on very heavily as the story goes on. But this movie is brutal. When you meet the general, the captain, straight away you can tell there's something off about him, that there's something you just don't like about him. And then when you first get him on his own, and when he's with his men, and he meets somebody who he sort of presumes are quote unquote rebels, how he treats them, what he does to them, it's a very brutal scene. I won't go into full details as spoilers, but he does something with a glass bottle, and you actually see what he does with it. That's incredibly just like Jesus Christ, you know. And that really sort of sets the tone straight away of like, yeah, my interpretations of who this character is and who they are as a person was completely correct. Um, and then it does a great way of showing you the brutal side of war, the brutal side of fascism, the brutal side of sort of what rebels and war and all that sort of thing. And then it shows you perfectly what it's like to be a child, what sort of Ophelia is dealing with, and how that she's got this magical world that she disappears into. And that's sort of the beautiful side. So you get a good contrast of the dark and the brutal and the true to life realistic world, and the childistic sort of magical, fanciful, pure, innocent side of it all. Um, like I said, this is a very much a fairy tale for grown-ups. This is not for kids. This is not something that you would put on for little Jimmy, because Jimmy will have nightmares. Because it is scary at times. It is horrific. It's not just the adult side of it. You've also got the fairy tale side of it. And I'll get onto the practical effects in a minute. But even the practical effects and the fairies, they all look quite creepy. They all look very sort of untrustworthy. And there is a point to that. There is a point to that, and you learn at the point as the story goes on, especially at the end, which I won't spoil. But once you get to the end, that all sorts to make sense as to why they seem that way and why they make you feel that way. But as I mentioned, there are different perspectives. You see the world, through adult eyes, as you or I would see it, the way it actually is, the way you can actually see it. And then a child will see it completely differently. They still see the magic. Most people will look at a tree and just see a tree. Whereas a child will look at a tree and they will notice every single little detail. They'll notice how green each leaf is, or which ones have gone brown, and they would even their brain could go in as far as wonder that it looks like an old creature, that has been frozen in time. And these beautiful ideas and concepts that children come up with, and a lot of adults still tend to keep if their child at heart, like I am myself. Most adults still see these things, but majority of the time, majority of adults, especially in times of war, in times of strife, you quickly have to grow up and you have to stop believing. You get to the age of not believing, and you have to basically see the world for as it is, because that's how you survive. But I love that contrast, that different perspectives of seeing the worlds differently. And then when both of those worlds eventually collide, it's heart wrenching. It's very sad. And again, I won't go into spoilers, but this movie does get very emotional, not just for Ophelia, but in general, as the war goes on, as this battle goes on, and as each character has their own internal struggles. You can tell that the general, the captain, he's got his own struggles that he's dealing with, that have sent him doolally. Ophelia, she's still young. She's realized this new big mystery, this big secret, this magical world, and then what that means for her. Then you've got Ophelia's mother, who's pregnant, who's not dealing very well with the pregnancy, and how both characters, the captain and Ophelia, have to deal with this. Because in my interpretation, that they are the two main characters. Those are the two sort of conflicting issues. You have other characters like Mercedes, who is the sort of head, I would say head nurse, head sort of carer for all the other servants and all the other people in this little house village that they're in. Um, and then you have sort of the character, you have the doctor, and you have the rebels, and there are these small different characters, all have their own stories, and all feel real. None of them feel like they're just there a character that they show up once and they disappear, or they show up here and there. Each character feels real. Each character has a backstory. You can feel there's a history to each character. You can tell that each character has been through hell and back, and they've had their struggles, but they're staying strong because you have to in war times. But the main characters are the captain, who shows you the perspective of the war, of everything that's going on, and the brutal side of it, and how brutal it's made him, and how brutal he is, as well as you have the perspective of Ophelia and the magical side of it. So I know I've gone on about it a lot, but I just love the different perspectives, how you get to see things differently. You don't get that in most stories. I've only ever read it in books, so you don't really see it much on screen. So to have that sort of perspective and different sides to each coin, I love that kind of stuff. So that was fantastic. Also, the incredible stand the test of time practical effects. This movie, it's not just gorgeous in what the theme settings and all that, but it's gorgeous in how it looks as well. Yes, there is a bit of CGI here and there, and the fairies at times don't look 100%, but that's not an issue because the practical effects bolster it. The practical effects keep everything looking gorgeous, pretty. Like, this movie was made in 2006, it's now 2023, and it still looks beautiful. Like, I could happily say this movie was made yesterday, and I would believe you if you told me. Because it doesn't look like it's aged. It doesn't look like it's any older than now. And I feel like it will still stand the test of time 20 years from now, because it is gorgeous. Like, the Thorn, he is, how can I explain it? He just looks real. He looks like a character. Like, if magic existed, and if thorns existed and fairies existed, this is what they would look like. And if you met one, you went outside your house and you went into the woods and you met one, this is how they would look. It doesn't look like he's wearing prosthetics. It doesn't feel like it's not real. Everything looks real. You've got the Slim Man. Well, I call him the Slim Man. I don't know if that's what his name is. That's just the name I put down for notes. But there's a character that Ophelia, she goes to this other world and she meets this character. This character never talks, never does anything. He's just a visual presence, and then eventually he's a very looming sort of scary horror even presence, as this character chases Ophelia. But even that looks terrifying, and it looks terrifying because it looks real. It looks something that you could possibly see in your nightmares. It looks something that you wouldn't want chasing you. It looked real. The CGI a bit on the hands, but again, that's because the practical effects are so good that you notice it at first, but then your brain goes, "Oh well," it's not an issue at all. And I can feel like this movie will stand the test of time, and as the years go on, it will just age like fine wine and just get better and better and better. And yeah, this is why I always say practical effects are the best you can do. You can have the best CGI in the world, but eventually time will pass, that technology will evolve, and it will get cheaper, and other movies will use that technology, and it will come commonplace till eventually, again, 10, 20 years from now, CGI will look better, and then you watch a movie from 10 years ago that had the top of the range CGI at the time and looks like pants, you know. And that's not an issue of it not looking great. It's just a fact of because we've been sort of desensitized to it. We've already seen it. Whereas practical effects, if done well, they will stand the test of time because it's real. It is real. It's makeup. It is prosthetics. It is art. It is, you don't go to a museum and look at Michelangelo's David and go, oh, well, it's not that good, is it? Because it's old. You're like, no, that's beautiful. It's always beautiful because it stands the test of time. It's gorgeous. Same with paintings and murals and all that. They look gorgeous because yes, they were done hundreds of years ago, but they stand the test of time because the human expression, the human hand has had a hand in making them practically, you know. And I know I went a bit of a rant there, but it is just art. There is so much art in this movie that every scene you could pause it and you could freeze frame it and put it on a poster and you use it as a screensaver. You could use it just to break down the ideas of lighting, the ideas of how to tell a story using visuals, using narrative. Everything about it just has that sort of um, shine of a creative hand of somebody like Del Toro, who, as I read in the introduction, spent a long time putting this story together, putting this idea together, creating the characters, drawing the characters, visually breaking down each individual piece of every bit of this movie, and then bringing it together and putting it on screen. You can tell that every part was thought of. The character designs, the costumes, the area, the environment, the themes, the setting, everything is just done in such a way that it conveys. And I haven't I have mentioned this, but I haven't really mentioned here at the moment in this interview, well, not interview, in this review, that this movie's not an English film. It's a Spanish speaking film. I had to read the subtitles. And this shows how not just powerful this movie is, but how powerful Amelie is and how powerful cinema in general is if when done right, and I mean that when done right, um, it doesn't matter the language barrier or any sort of barrier at all. If done right, art will prevail. You know, you can connect to a character even if you don't speak their language because it's a human emotion. If you can feel the emotion on the screen, you can feel the emotion in yourself. Your heart will do the rest. All you have to do is listen. As long as you take in what you see, if you use all your senses, what you can see, what you can hear, what you internally feel, your body would do the rest. And I did. I sat and I read the lines and I saw what I could see. And yeah, if this movie was English, then I could probably, maybe you could say, I would connect more to it. But because it wasn't, I had to listen. I had to pay attention. That's one thing that you don't get most days in movies, especially if you watch a movie in your own native tongue. You don't have to pay attention because you can just listen to the words and understand what's going on. Whereas if it's something that's not your native language, not your native tongue, you have to pay attention, which means you have to not just read what's been said, but also you have to pay attention to how characters are standing, how their facial expressions, how they move, how the background looks, how the music is going. You have to pay attention to every single individual facet of every single bit of detail that you see on screen. You have to use all your senses. And this is why I enjoy watching movies that aren't English, because I have to actually try my best to find enjoyment out of it. I have to use all my senses to find what makes it so wonderful, to derive the meaning, to derive the story, to derive the themes. I have to put the work in. And I like that. And a lot of people don't want to do that. I understand it because again the whole point of a movie is meant to be a movie where you're lost. But if you just go in and you just watch what it is, you don't even it's not even work. You're not even trying. All you've got to do is sit, listen and look. That's it. And let the movie do the rest. And for a movie like this, that is art, that is very sort of fanciful and stylish, you don't have to even have to try. The movie does it for you. Very much, I could go as far to say that if you took the subtitles off and you just listened to it in Spanish, you might not understand what they're saying, but you will understand what is going on, how the characters feel, through what you visually see and what you can hear through the music. Um, and that's just beautiful. That is just storytelling and move and cinema done right, in my opinion. I can see why this movie is so widely loved and such um, a classic by so many people. And I again, I I'm kind of kicking myself now that I never watched this movie earlier, but I'm kind of glad I watched it now because I can share my gushness, my excitement with you all of how wonderful this movie is, because it's wonderful, it's gorgeous, you know. Um, but also, I can see sort of the comparisons between this movie and Pinocchio. As I mentioned, like when I did my Pinocchio review, that one is set very much again during a time of war, during a time of strife. The differences between that movie was set also during the Second World War, but it was between sort of the Italy, and the Nazis when they were working together. This one is more about the Spanish and during their civil war during 1944 that they were having at the same time. But again, there are sort of similarities here. Granted, this movie was made 2006 and Pinocchio was like last year, 2022. But you can tell that there is this story that he's trying to tell, this sort of story that I don't know much about in terms of Del Toro's personal life. But I don't know, it felt like there was a comparison. It was sort of like there were tales of a time that had strife in his country and had strife in his world, where this is his way of expressing it, because you have the evil generals. You have the evil general and captain here in this movie, and you have it in Pinocchio. You've got fascism and the worst sides of it, and how it can ruin lives and ruin people, you know. But also, as well as all that dark and all that grown up and horrible stuff, there's beauty. There's beauty in time of struggle. That magic is alive, that as long as you have belief, as long as you believe, you have hope, um, that will always prevail. And I can now, just sitting there, I can see that sort of idea, that concept. Again, this is my interpretation from watching this movie and Pinocchio and a few other films of his, that in all of his movies, even, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, which is a fantastic film, didn't do very well, but it's a great movie. There's always that internal struggle. There's always that dark side, but there's always, again, that idea of hope. And there's that hope of belief in magic, and belief that as long as you believe, no matter if it's magic or whatever, that it will always prevail, that things will get better. Even if you are struggling, things will improve. You just have to fight through the struggle to get to sort of the peace, to the, again, the magic, the belief, the wonderment, to be a child again. And I won't go into it, obviously spoilers, but this movie, especially when you get to the end, and when all the perspectives come together, and the grown-up world and the childlike world, and everything, just when it comes together and you really sort of get that big sort of, I understand now. That's where you're like, yes, I'm glad I held my belief. I'm glad I didn't succumb to the darkness, that I allowed myself to stay humble, to stay sort of pure. And when all seemed lost, that the characters got what they deserved, either for good or for bad. But at the end of it, everything just works. Yeah. I don't know how to go into more detail without going to spoilers, but it's just wonderful, you know. And I can feel myself getting a bit hippy dippy, and I do apologize for that, but it's just art, and I love artistic movies, I really, really do. So overall, my thoughts of this movie is it's gorgeous. Would I recommend to watch it? Most definitely. Don't be put off because it's not an English speaking film. If you've never watched this film before, don't be put off by that. Give it a go. Generally, watch it, enjoy it for what it is. You might have a different interpretation of it than I would, but I would say give it a go. It's a wonderful experience and a fantastic time. Um, yeah, it's a wonderful movie. If you have watched it, then you'll understand what I'm trying to, or hopefully you'll understand what I'm trying to say. It's just yeah, it's a very gorgeous. I feel very, well, I was going to say lethargic. I feel very sort of humble. I feel very pleasant and peaceful. Without sounding too big-headed, I feel very wonderful. This movie's made me feel very sort of pleasant. It made me believe magic, which I've never, I've always been a young soul. I've never been an adult, really. I'm 25, but I still act like I'm a child because I still am very young at heart, and I still very much believe in magic and stuff like that and wonderment. So for me, it's not so hard to experience anything like this and to be like, oh, magic, oh, okay. I'm like, yeah, I'm there straight away. Okay, magic exists. I'm there for it. So for me, it's not so hard. But this movie's kind of left me very sort of in the feeling of, magic is real, and that no matter the struggles, no matter the strife, no matter the issues, that as long as you believe in magic, you believe in the fairy tales and the fairies and that sort of thing, that the world isn't so bleak, and that things can be wonderful and beautiful. You just have to look for them. And for me, yeah, it's knock it straight on the head. It's done. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. It's wonderful. It's art. So that's been my opinions on Pan's Labyrinth. Thank you very, very much for joining me. If you would like to hear more things from me, you can follow me at Twitter at nerdstalgic_pod. You can also find me and this podcast on anywhere and everywhere that you basically can find podcasts. The only place you won't find me is Apple Podcasts, but I'm everywhere else. I'm even on Audible. I'm on YouTube. If you listen to this on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that jazz. It really helps me out immensely. As I mentioned, as recording this, I'm currently at 89 subscribers, so all I need is one more subscriber to push me over the edge to 90. So if I haven't reached 90 yet, by the time you listen to this on YouTube, or even if I haven't passed 90, drop me a subscribe. I'd be so, so grateful. My goal is 100 before Christmas. That'll be my little Christmas present. So if you want to give me an early Christmas present, get me to 100. If you can, I'll be absolutely elated. Also, if you listen to this on Spotify, don't forget to give me a like, comment. Spotify? No, sorry. Yeah. If you listen to me on Spotify, don't forget to give me a star rating. My brain was still in YouTube mode. I do apologise. You can star rating from 1 to 5 stars. 5 stars, best thing you've ever heard in your life. 1 star, absolute tripe. You don't agree with me at all. You think this movie's pants. You think I'm pants. Whatever you feel like is fair, please do rate me on Spotify. And so I have been your host, Luke the Human. You've been listening to the Nerdstalgic podcast. I will catch you in the next one. Bye bye.